All right, so move these timber products out of the way. We're going to have a talk about thinning. That short that I made generated quite a bit of conversation, and I would like to finish the talk here.
Ooh, dolly. What a main event this is.
So I've built this here fake timber sail, and I divided the ground into some quadrants. We're going to assume that every about inch is about 16 feet. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of these quadrants and we are going to thin it by various means to explain what I think the government is regularly up to, what my gripes are as a person who has my boots on the ground in sometimes unfavorable or dangerous situations, and how I think that the whole entire industry could move forward into a better place where everyone understands each other a little better, everyone respects each other a little better, and how we can make this work with a little more transparency between the industries. So I'll start this by saying that most of the government agencies, or at least most of the people that work for them, they have an agenda, which is environmental protection. And that's just kind of a given in the industry, that people who work for the Forest Service care about environmental protection more than they care about my safety and my prosperity. And valid, fine, that's right. And it's generally a given that the timber companies and the logging companies care about their profits more than the environment or my safety or prosperity. And then it is true that I personally care about my production and my safety and prosperity more than I care about the timber company's profits, the loggers' profits, or the environmentalists' agenda, because I think that I have the environment in my best interest, because I want this industry to continue for years and years and years, and I would love for my grandchildren to make a living out of the woods. So all those disclaimers, I guess that would be just transparency about agendas and interests. Here's a stand of woods. And so here we have pretty solid tree diameter size, pretty steady. They're all close to an average. Here we have larger growth interspersed with smaller growth. Here we have mostly all smaller growth again, and here we have larger growth mixed in with smaller growth. And we're going to assume that this is just like the sail that I just got out of, that all these trees are either second or third growth, the bigger ones being second growth, these being third growth, these being an entire third growth stand, and same with this and this. So these two, very similar. As the map goes, uphill is this way, so we've got a high point right here. This is like the knob of a little hump. And then this hogback ridge comes down like this and down like this. So here is a pretty gentle side hill slope. Up here is a little steeper of a slope. Here is a pretty gentle bowl, but the wash in the bowl gets steeper up towards the top where it slid out a long time ago. So we just have the contours of a hill here. And if you guys don't know how to read maps, let me know in the comments, because I will do a cartography, a map reading section, because a good cutter should be able to look at the map and know what the ground looks like just off of the map alone, without any, I don't care for that goofy shading they put in. They have gradient maps now, and just a good map, a good topo, you should be able to tell a lot. So I've drawn this map in on the ground. So what we're going to do is we're going to thin this piece in a D by D thin. D by D stands for dominant by diameter. So we're going to write that in here. Okay, and then on this map, we're going to do a basal thin, a density of basal area, dBA thin. Okay, and I'm going to do that on each of these, and then we're going to talk about some comparisons here. So I'm going to basal thin this piece that's all the same size. I'm going to basal thin this piece with an agenda, and then I'm going to do a D by D thin in both of these. So what we'll do, I'm going to try and get my phone on a stand here, so that way we can just have a look at what I'm doing while I talk. And this isn't going to be super scientific or particularly maybe easy to follow. 'Cause I'm new at this. I just want to get this info out there. So let's just do the best we can and get into it. Okay, we will see if this works. I'm right-handed, so you'll have to forgive me that this is going to be a little bit backwards, but you'll hopefully be able to get the idea. So in a D by D thin, around here, it is very common for 16-foot spacing to be the prescription. And that means what you'll do is pick the most dominant tree by diameter, and you'll select that tree. So what I'll do is I'll take this little bit of pink pen here, and we start in a corner. So lowest point of the unit, I'm going to start here. I'm going to start probably here. So I'll start right here, and I'll select this tree is dominant by diameter. Now everything 16 feet away from this tree, as long as it's not bigger than this tree, we'll presume this is the biggest tree for a 16-foot circle, everything else will get cut. So we'll take blue, and we will cut this tree, this tree, this tree, and this tree. And I've scaled this so that 1 inch is 16 feet. So let's take these calipers, screw these calipers down to 1 inch. So that tree also goes. Okay, so now you're through here. Now you pick another tree that's dominant by diameter. This tree looks bigger than the ones around it. This tree looks maybe a little smaller than that. This tree looks pretty good size. So this tree will be a dominant by diameter. This tree here is over 1 inch away, so that will be another dominant by diameter. And then everything 16 feet away from those trees will get cut. And then once it gets close, see, I'm taking out these calipers. This is literally in the woods where I would be taking a tape on my belt and measuring what's within. This one's close, and that's a pretty dominant sized tree, so that might actually be a liner, and I would leave that tree, and the spacing would be a little tight right there. When the Forest Service comes out, they will measure spacing, and they'll say, hey, there was one that was a little narrow there, but I saw that you didn't have much close and it would have been too wide. And so they'll see what you're up to if you're being reasonable, and we're reasonable. And so they'll see that and they'll understand. So I'm going to leave that tree. And then I'm going to cut this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. Now everything 1 inch away from that guy will get cut. And so that will be this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. This is another dominant, and it's inside the ring. I'm going to leave that tree again. That's a big tree. So then you cut this guy, this guy, this guy. Over here, see, we're starting to run into a problem. It's going to be a little thin right there. Okay, so we've got that's outside, and that's outside. So we're going to have a little further than 16 feet in this particular area unless we do something. But generally, there's not a lot going on there. So this is going to be the dominant, and the spacing will be a tiny bit too thin right here, but they'll see where it's a little tight right here. They'll understand what we're getting at. So I'm going to continue thinning this, and I'll thin this whole piece on this picture, and then we'll come back. Okay, so here we've finished the thinning, and these pink painted trees will be the leaf trees. Now in most D by D, the cutter is the one that ends up selecting this. It's an unpainted unit. You go in, you start in a corner, and you start just measuring and selecting your dominant by diameter. And a lot of it is just by feel. You can get pretty good at it and pretty fast at it in timber that's mostly the same size. For one, they're usually a little more lenient, and for two, you can just kind of make your best guess. A lot of times if a tree is a 1/4 inch larger in diameter than another, it's generally negligible. I mean, they want you to do your best, and it's pretty evident by the result when a guy did their best or didn't do their best. So what you end up with is a really nicely thinned unit, and we're going to presume that the logging is going to log from up here at somewhere in the highest point. And so when they log from either back here or somewhere up here, they're going to be able to log through this without a ton of corridor considerations, and it's a good resulting product. And then a painting crew who's employed by the government can also do this process with a paint can, so that way the cutting contractor doesn't need to waste time with it. And generally, it is way cheaper to pay people with a paint can in their hand to do this than it is to pay a $100 an hour hand faller to do this, with the tape measure and an axe. It's just log cutters are more expensive than painters, so it really is more economical to pay the painters to do it. So now we'll move into this unit. Excuse me while I shuffle the camera a tiny bit. And we're going to do D by D. Okay, now we're going to do D by D in mixed growth ages. And it gets a little easier. So once again, we're going to start down at the lowest point. The lowest point is right here. And then there's another kind of, as this ground sweeps back, this edge is a little lower. So like you'll cut this, and then you'll come around the hump and you'll cut this, and you'll just kind of loop around and around and around this ground if this is your strip. So we'll start in this corner, and we will use pink to mark our first dominant. And it's pretty darn easy and cut and dry when you're in growth like this. Anything an inch away from it pretty much gets cut, and there's going to be another dominant. So I will go ahead and cut this unit to the thinning spec, and we will basically, what you'll see is an understory thin with a handful of the larger second growth taken. And basically what that does is that those small handful of larger second growth basically pay for the cost of me cutting this valueless third growth. And so what you get is a managed stand of timber, a managed forest that did not cost you all of your older second growth, but also doesn't cost the cutter or the logger a fortune to come in and do it. It pays for itself. So it's a pretty good setup when you want an understory thin and a managed sustainable product. So let's do that. Okay, so while I'm doing this here, see, because I'm cutting this on the paper as I would cut it out in the world. I started here, and then I moved up this hillside, and then I came around to the low ground here and started peeling this up. Well, now what you can see is I've run into a situation where I've selected a dominant tree, and up the hill is a more dominant tree that looks like it's about to be cut. But if I select this as my dominant tree, I can't uncut these trees. And then what I'll have is a giant open space. So you do this is a more dominant tree than this. I didn't know that when I came up here, and even so, I cannot uncut these little tiny trees. Use your judgment, and like, you will get foresters, especially Forest Service foresters, coming in and saying, hey, why did you XYZ? And it's easy to explain. I came up from here, I selected the dominant tree, and by then I'm either going to have a really thick spot or a really thin spot. And this is a hammer tree here. And most D by Ds they come with the stipulation of nothing over a certain diameter, like 32 inches will regularly be that, yes, this is a D by D thin, and also don't cut anything over 32 inches. Or in this BLM sale that we just did, it was don't cut anything over 40 inches. So this, we can either presume it's over 32 inches, because this is not to scale, right? Like this would, if it was to the 1 inch scale, this would be like a 12-foot or a 10-foot tree on the butt. But for illustration purposes, we'll assume this is right about on the cusp of a cut, don't cut. And so what we'll do is we will end up with a little thick spot here, but since it's oversized, we'll ignore it for the D by D. And then you can leave that one there and explain, hey, I came in, I got to these, there was a couple more dominant trees, I left the most dominant of the stand, and then you just resume cutting as you were. All right, so now in this stand, what you end up with is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 of your older second growth got cut out of the stand. 2 or 3, I would say this was intended to be one of the larger second growth. But 2 or 3 of your smaller ones, just by the way the stand grew, end up getting left as a young leaf tree. And so what you get is a mostly understory thin with a handful of these larger growth cut in order to pay for the prescription. And that is an unfortunate fact of the industry, is I'm not out here volunteering my time out of the goodness of my heart. I really enjoy this industry. I really want the forest to be well managed, to be a little fire stiff, to be a little wind stiff, to be healthy, to be ecological. But I don't care about it enough to do it for free out of the goodness of my own heart. So it needs to pay me and my bills. It needs to pay the logger and the logger's bills. It needs to pay the administrative bills. It needs to pay all the bills required to fit this prescription, as well as achieve the desired prescription. So that's what, if you did both of these units by dominant by diameter, that's what you would end up with. And generally, D by D is a pain in the butt when the trees are all the same size and small. And it's very, very, very useful when you have interspersed second growth and third growth, and you want to end up with a mostly second growth dominant stand that resembles old growth. And we do that a lot. We grow stands of timber that mimic the ecological appearance of old growth, and animals treat it as such. They don't know the difference between an old growth tree and a second growth tree. What they know is growth patterns. They know sunlight reaching the ground, the amount of brush that's in it, the distance that tops are apart from one another. Animals know that. They don't know the difference between an old growth tree and a second growth tree. Now, and this is a little beyond the scope of this project here, but in this unit, let's pretend that this is a couple of, let's say this is 4 acres here if we split this into quarters. And so in this 4 acres, they will take 1 tree per acre generally and kill it with, which I get, that's not really fair. This is more like one acre here. So they will take out of this 1 acre and they will kill 1 tree by base girdling, and then they'll pick another really big healthy tree and they'll kill it at the top by top girdling. And so then there'll be a dead snag top that'll school marm out and rot hollow in the center, and there will be a dead snag in this unit left until the next time they manage it, and it creates that faux old growth wildlife conscious result. So this is pretty common. This is pretty good representation. So now we'll get into the D by D. And D by D, what you do, you take this tool called a Basal prism, and the prism has several different facets of the prism that you can look through. And generally they come in different settings, they come in different scales, and I am not particularly privy to all of that. I haven't done the most of research because every time that I've done a basal sale, I get handed a prism and told how many trees to look at from the stump. I don't have the forestry degree, so I get told how to use the particular one that's handed to me. And generally what I've done for a basal thin is that you start your sail anywhere you want, and you stand on the stump of a tree, and you want to be able to see 6 standing live trees through the prism that you're looking through from the stump that you're standing on. And if you do that over and over and over, you end up with a stand that from every left stump, you can see 6 trees through your prism from standing on that stump. And what the basal prism does is it doesn't discriminate between the size of trees. It is all about the density of basal area, which is selected by the size of stumps, the density of area on these trees. And you end up with a stand that is thinned very similar to a D by D, but without a ton of time wasted. And often this is the method that government agencies will use to prescribe the painting for a unit. And so I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like. And it's, again, basal thin in mixed size growth is a really, really good analog because it doesn't discriminate the size of the tree. And what you'll end up doing is taking some old and some young, and at the end, the resultant basal area is the same whether you like or not what was taken. My gripe with those jobs that we just came out of was that it was sold as a basal thin, and so often the cutting contractor will go, oh, well, it's a basal thin, so we're going to take some of the big and some of the small. And so, yes, it will pay for itself for me to fell and buck this smaller, tiny stuff to get 1 or 2 of these interspersed throughout an acre. And so that would generally pay for itself. But what we had was that they had done a basal thinning, but treated it as if it was D by D. And what happened was all these really nice second growth were left behind, which, fine, that sounds like an understory thin, but they didn't call it an understory thin. So what happened was it turned into a situation where it felt like someone lied. Someone got told a prescription and then used that prescription to push an agenda or to do what they wanted to do, and then lied about it. So that way some fool like me, I am the fool, I came to cut this and realized it wasn't truly a basal thin. It was thinned to a basal spec, but it more accurately would have been described as an understory thin. And so then it starts to feel like someone lied. Like you're polishing a turd. You've taken this thing that really is undesirable, that not many people would want to buy, and you called it something else. You know, you called your gruel a chicken casserole, and really at the end of the day, it's just gruel, and so it feels like a lie. So we'll start basal thinning here and get you the idea, and we're just going to pretend. I'm going to start right here. I'm obviously going to start on the lowest one, and I'm going to stand here, and I'm going to look to see 6 stumps in a circle around where I'm cutting. And so I'll start here, and we'll cut this one, and then stand on this stump, and I can make a selection here. And so out of this whole circle where I'm standing, I am probably going to take the first bigger one that's within an area. So I'm going to take this one, and then I'm going to leave this one, and then a handful of these over here. So I'll go ahead and paint my first leaf trees. These get left. These get cut. Now you can only see so far with a prism, and so this would probably be bordering the limit of where I could see. It just turns into fuzz, and so that's why the prism works the way it does. But pretty much from every stump that I cut, I will just grab the thing, I wear it around my neck, I'll grab it, I'll pull it up to my eye and shoot, and then just get another idea, and as I go, I'll just get into a workflow. So then standing from this stump, you kind of see an arc, and I'll cut this one, and then I'll stand on stumps, and I would probably cut this one, this one, this one, leave this one, cut this one, leave this, cut this, cut this, cut this. And so I will just work through this as a flow, and you'll get the basic idea of what it looks like when it's done. Okay, So now here is a pretty fair representation of a basal thinning as I would cut it from the bottom up. See, this is a big sweeping flatter bowl, and then it gets a little steeper up at the top, so I started at the bottom and started sweeping my way up. And what you get a lot of is like, oh man, I already cut a couple of these, and so I'll have to leave this big one and this one in order. And so what you end up with is a little bit of thicker patches. So right around here, it'll be around like maybe 150 dBA, and right here, it'll be around 150, 160 dBA. But then over in this corner, it'll only be 120 dBA, but 120 is the prescription, let's pretend. So I'll be a little over prescription and right on prescription. I'll be a little under prescription right here. But then the whole acre will come out to somewhere around 130, 120, 140. Somewhere to be conservative so I don't get in trouble, and where it looks good when I'm finished and it looks like I had a plan while I was moving through it. And, as for the couple of times that I've cut a basal thinning where I did the shooting, it's only been a couple, but I've never gotten in trouble. I've always had a like, wow, that looks good, and crown retention was good because you really try not to wipe out the trees and all these thinnings. But as you can see, this basal thinning already ended up thicker in the resultant product than the D by D, and has a much more favored interspersal of the larger oversize, but also quite a handful were taken. And so what it ends up with is that the diameter of basal area is very, very much consistent at the end, but you took enough of these large ones to pay for the time it took to do this thinning. And so the issue that I had is that in the last unit, they did a basal thinning where they kept every single one of these larger diameter trees, which is not what the prescription called for. The prescription called for a straight basal thinning. So they kept every single one of these larger diameter trees and quite a handful of these smaller trees. And so what it turned into was that the sale called for 120 dBA, and the sale was actually painted to around 160 to 180 dBA. And so for one, I had gotten in a small snafu for taking too many leaf trees because I could not get trees to just hit the ground. And so the BLM forester had to come out and shoot it with his basal prism, and he said, no, you guys are still well within spec. Everywhere he shot was around 160. The prescription called for 120. Keep doing what you're doing, whatever, it's fine. But that's not until after the forester in charge of me had already caused quite a fuss about me taking too many leaf trees when I just flat could not get the job done. So that can be a problem when all of the large trees get left along with some smaller, and furthermore that it wasn't even marked to the actual prescription. And of course the tree painting crew is never going to get in trouble for not painting to the actual prescription that was demanded by the contract, but I will get in trouble if I violate the contract. So it's kind of a no-win situation, and why I get so mad at the government is because there's always accountability for me, but there's not always accountability for other contractors in the line of the process. And it makes me mad because I just want everybody held to the same level of accountability as I am. And I will just never get that. And the other issue is that when they had painted all of the larger trees and taken only some of the smaller trees, is that when you go through the stand now, it is absolutely not a basal thinning. It comes out to a basal area, but it is a true partial understory thin, and that would have been a more truthful description of the timber sale. And so that's kind of what I'm getting on about also is the truth and honesty of the description of these timber sales, and that sometimes, especially coming from the government, it is an out and out lie. So now let's move down into the all third growth block here, and we'll do a basal thinning here, which is going to be very, very cut and dry. We're just gonna We're just going to stand on a stump. All of the trees are the same size, and it's just going to pretty much end up how it ends up. All right, so once again, we'll start in a corner. We will cut a tree, and then I will move on from here. So from this tree, we'll choose leave tree, and we'll cut everything else. And we'll stand on this stump. We've got, from this stump, we can see 1. I'll circle this stump. From this stump, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we need one more leaf tree somewhere close. We'll choose this one. And so then we'll cut this one, cut this one, cut this one, cut this one. And then we'll stand on this stump and we'll shoot it again, and we'll shoot it again, we'll shoot it again. So I'll go through this stand and thin it. Okay, so now we've thinned this stand. And as you can see, once again, at 120, or generally seeing 6 trees per stump, and I gave myself around an inch. I eyeballed it, which happens a lot, and the stand ended up a little thicker than the D by D, because the D by D is really, it's really set standard, you know, for the most dominant tree by diameter per a given spacing. So what we ended up with was a little bit thicker of spacing, but a little bit more natural of spacing. Some clumps of closer together, some a little more spaced apart, but in general, I think this would meet the spec for 120 dBA per a acre area. And so what it turns into is the amount of leaf trees per acre is greater, but in mixed growth, you should get a little more fair mixture of the second growth and the third growth trees being cut and being left. And so I hope this really sheds a little more light on what I was griping about so badly, and about how to fix this, how to solve this problem as a whole. Now, I'm not going to say that there's one solution to all of this, but man, I am so tempted to say that there is one solution to all of this, which is honesty. Let's just be honest about what we're doing. I'm trying to maximize production and profit with ecology of the forest and the future growth of the forest in mind. The timber company is trying to maximize profit and generally doesn't seem to care about ecology. They're just trying to stay as much within the rules as they can and not get dinged and get in trouble, which costs them money. And the government agencies in charge are generally trying to maximize the ecological structure of the forest, and they don't care about production or profitability. And so it's the three of us, if we're honest with each other and we care about each other and we care about what we're doing, we can maximize all of those things without too much hurt to any individual parties. And the problem, as I think it sits, is that nobody cares about each other. People don't care about each other. People don't care about people. People don't care about anything any further away from themselves than their own dicks. And that just seems to be the fact of the matter, is that I end up looking out for myself only. The mill's looking out for their self only. The Forest Service or the BLM is looking out for their self only. The tree painters are looking out for their agenda only. And no one's held accountable, and no one has any honesty or any care for the people coming next after them. And so it's one of those things that, I rant and rave about it, but it's the, why does it feel like I am the only one who cares about, I don't want the mill or the forester to get in trouble. I don't want the BLM man to have to come out and raise a fuss with me. I don't want the logger to have a hard time coming through here. Like, why does it always feel like I am the only one who cares about everybody involved in the process, and everybody else is just trying to skin your backside as hard as they can, and they don't care about the consequences? So hopefully this gives you guys a little more insight on the issue and what I was crying and complaining about, because it's a real issue and it causes some safety issues. It causes some profitability issues. Profitability issues lead directly to safety issues, because then you end up with a boss or someone saying, hey, faster, 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 I can barely pay for this. and it can get really ugly really fast. So this is a real issue, and it definitely demands some attention from the industry at large, and especially when it comes to holding people accountable who do not follow the prescription of a contract. Because I will get a fine if I violate the prescription of a contract bad enough, and it feels like I'm the only one who ever can. The logger doesn't get in trouble. He didn't cut down the trees. He's just logging them up. The painter doesn't get in trouble because all he did is just use a paint can only. The forester doesn't get in trouble, even though he probably should have pulled out a prism before he bought this sale and said, hey, this isn't to the contract spec. So nobody gets in trouble for not doing their job except for me. And that's why I get frustrated.